Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
There's less sheen on your forehead than mine.
Well, just give me a minute. I'll
okay.
Get there.
You're going to get into it. All right. We'll get that cat wrapped around your neck and it'll be good. So, before we get going, I'm going to ask you 3 rapid fire questions that are going to be in the form of sort of speed dating. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. You can have you get one or the other in all 3 options. Listeners, you can play along if you like. First one, Batman or Robin? Who would you rather be?
Batman.
Okay. Would you pick champagne or the champagne of beers? Miller High Life.
Ooh. Oh, that's an impossible question. Like forever? Like, does the other one go away?
Tonight. Just tonight.
The champagne of beers.
It is the summer, if that feels more appropriate. Okay. And lastly, the stars or the stripes?
This feels like a loaded question. But I look better in stars than stripes. So the stars.
All right, great. It does feel like a loaded question, but it was actually the most childlike question that I thought of because I was like, that's a dumb question, but it could actually be perceived as loaded, Paul. So then I went forward with it. And here we are. It worked. So tell me where you are. What's the circumstances? What's happening in your world at the moment?
So I'm sitting in my library. I'm holding up scare quotes because it's just a room in my house in Connecticut. I live in Norwalk, which is on the coast, just about 60 miles outside of New York City. We're having a lovely, not too hot summer day, or now summer night. Mm-hmm. And at some point during this chat, just, to preemptively mention it, my cat, who's very interested in Zoom conversations, will probably come in here and launch himself onto my lap, and there will be a little bit of chaos and maybe a cat butt on screen for everyone to enjoy.
What is your cat's name?
Rasputin.
Rasputin. Will it help if I scold Rasputin?
Well, he can't hear you. Not that he would not care if he could. He does his own thing.
Is Rasputin named after Lenin's advisor?
The Mad Monk.
Right.
This guy was around in like the 11th century. I think.
Wasn't there a Rasputin that was Lenin's advisor also?
If so, I do not know that.
Okay. Well, I will accept yours as cooler because the Mad Monk sounds better.
Yeah, fun fact, Rasputin's severed and preserved penis is also on display, supposedly in a museum somewhere. The real Rasputin, not my cat. We didn't do that.
Would be a small, never mind. Okay, so.
You don't know. All right, no, I'm just kidding.
One thing we build in talking about getting to chat with you was this idea of voice. How does one find a voice? And I'm going to now ask you an annoying question that will make you think a little bit, I think. How would you describe your voice? What would you say your voice is?
God, it is an annoying question.
I know, but it's like a good one to make you think. Sorry.
And an impossible one.
No, it's not impossible.
You ever hear one of those sort of synthesized voices where it's a bunch of different pitches talking at once and it's all been kind of flattened down into one? Something creepy like that, maybe. But I guess this is a way of saying that I don't actually write in any one voice particularly. I think, because I do so many different types of writing, and, I do journalism, I do reporting, I do culture, and lately a lot of culture war, essay writing. I write novels. I've written for teens. I have an adult book coming out about this time next year. And, all of those are somewhat different voices. And even though I think that they're all recognizably my own, I don't know how I would describe them except that they're all me.
All right. When you first got started, I would say that I went through this. I think a lot of writers go through this idea of at the beginning, you kind of copy other people's voices until you start to find your own. Were you influenced by certain writers when you first got started?
So I was a big reader growing up, and I did, when I very first started trying to write fiction, particularly, I definitely went through a period where I tried and failed so spectacularly to be like a 16-year-old female John Irving. Um,
Oh,
don't try this one at home.
now you're speaking my language. That's like my ultimate favorite author probably is John Irving.
I went through a period where I read virtually nothing else. I read The World According to Garp when I was, I think, about 15, 16 years old, and it really changed my life. I did not know up until that point that books could be like that, even though I had read very, very widely, but there was something so energetic and cheeky and funny and willing to kind of tread these into these taboo areas about his work that I just was fascinated by. Turns out I can't emulate that, at least not the way he does, but lesson learned. So
have you ever seen I think there's a Wikipedia page that has all of John Irving's books, and then it's like a spreadsheet sort of with, does it have this theme in it? Does it have an older woman seducing a child? Does it have wrestling? Does it have like a circus or a European city? Yeah.
Yeah. Bears are a big thing.
He's got some things to work out. Also, dreamy for women of a certain age, not your age. I saw him in Kansas City one time read, and the like 65-year-old ladies were a swooning. It was like going to see the Beatles.
I bet they were.
Because he's also,
blame them.
He's pretty handsome and got great white hair and a good voice. So yeah, he did well.
Okay, note to self, YouTube John Irving reading, not for any particular reason, not for filthy reasons, just, I'm curious.
Right. So in your fiction, you may have emulated John Irving for a while. Did you have certain nonfiction heroes?
Growing up? Not when I was younger, although later, and we can talk about this a little bit after I talk about this part, but I did kind of get into writing as an adult through a personal blog that I had. It was sort of in the golden age of blogging when everyone had a blog. And I was really, really obsessed with women about my age or maybe a little older who could write about their own lives in a way that was really incisive and funny and thoughtful, and then it kind of tied in broader themes. And Sloane Crosley was one who I just thought she was so funny, just die funny. And Megan Daum, also a hero of mine. I loved her essay about aspirational house hunting for homes you will never actually own.
That's easier, by the way, in Kansas, where I'm from. I was actually home briefly recently, and my brother's girlfriend came home for the first time. And she grew up in the Bay Area and has never really been to the Midwest. So we were taking her around playing a game called What Does This Person's Name Think About Home Prices? Because in Kansas City, you can buy like palatial places for not very much. And it was a good reminder for me living in LA of like, oh, there's hope. I just have to not live here.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, in my aspirational Zillowing moments, I spent a lot of time cruising around the Midwest. Lincoln, Nebraska, a particular favorite. Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah.
Right. So go back and tell me, how did the writing start? So, there's the blog, but like what inspired you to start writing?
So I was working as a publicist first job out of college, I was a book publicist at a publishing house. And it was one of these jobs that you get because you have what they call like writing skills or communication skills. This was the early 2000s. So I was doing this, and I was spending a lot of time, obviously reading books, reading the books that I was promoting, reading the books that were all around the office, and also spending a lot of time talking to writers, working with writers. You spend a lot of time as a publicist interacting with journalists. And eventually, while I was bored at my job, I started this blog to sort of kill time because there was a lot of downtime in the office. And I started writing about my life. This blog, this is, by the way, long since defunct, so don't go looking for it. You won't find it. But yeah, I garnered an audience of my mom,
Sure.
to begin with.
I mean, that's a good start. If your mom doesn't read it, that's
right. Then you know that you're barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
But eventually, and because there was a sort of a community aspect, I think similar to what you have set up in your space now, where people would read each other's writing, they'd read each other's blogs, they'd support each other's blogs. There was a sort of a little community of niche bloggers who wrote about different topics, and the one that I was most adjacent to was sort of centered in New York City and centered around Gawker, back when Gawker was good. And so I sort of found a little audience in that moment, and rediscovered writing for pleasure, creating a narrative, even though I was just writing about things like putting an IKEA bookcase together. I discovered that it was something that I really enjoyed and that people could, sometimes respond to.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned like finding the fun in it again. Had it been fun and then it went away?
I wrote recreational when I was in high school. Then I went to college and I majored in art, and I just sort of forgot about writing for fun. All I ever did was write art criticism, essays, and that kind of thing, which is challenging, but not that much fun.
Right. And there's not as much reward. Probably you're getting those pieces torn down more than you're getting great feedback.
Yeah, that's true, especially in in a college setting, for sure.
Right. Okay. So blog gets going. And so what's the trajectory from there? What happened next?
Blog gets going around the same time.
Incidentally, I'm going to interrupt because I really want to know, what was the blog called? I feel like that's important.
Nope.
Damn it. Well, you said it's gone.
Yeah, but I live in perpetual terror of somebody managing to unearth it. So
somebody
it's a secret.
Figures out how to time machine their way back and get old web pages.
Yeah, I'm getting nervous that I even talked about it this much.
Right.
But blog gets going around the same time. So I'm working as a publicist, and a publicist requires that you be really great working with people, talking to people. I realized around this time that I hate people.
Okay.
Or at least I'm not very good at spending a lot of time interacting with them, taking meetings with them. And because I was spending so much time interacting with journalists, I reached out to a freelancer who I had a good relationship with, and I just said, look, I don't want to do what I'm doing. I want to do what you're doing. Do you have any advice for me? And he was so nice. He gave me some really, really great advice on what it would be, what it required to get a freelance career started as a journalist, as a sort of a culture writer. He also was very upfront with me about how long it takes, which in hindsight, I really appreciated it. My expectations were low and realistic, and that ended up being very useful when it came to not giving up. So at that point, I started doing freelance copywriting. I started applying on job boards like Media Bistro, Craigslist, any place that I could pick up a gig here or there that would allow me to have something on my resume. I started blogging for a site called Spark Notes, which used to have a Spark Life blog that did lifestyle content. And then I'm sort of fudging everything together here, but I guess fast forward a few years, and I had been, sort of secretly tapping away at something that I thought was maybe a short story or maybe the start of a novel. I got laid off in the 2008 like mass die-off of everything, and ended up finishing that manuscript and selling it. That was my first book. That was Amelia Ann is Dead and Gone. So everything just started kind of coalescing, not coincidentally, around the moment when I suddenly had a lot more free time on my hands to write and, frantically apply for jobs that I never ended up getting. And now here we are.
So, you mentioned writing in many different genres and for different outlets. How has that helped each other? Which is a grammatically incorrect sentence, but how does one thing, inform the next thing?
So, all right, let me think about this. How does one inform the next?
How does it help you? How does it help your fiction to write more immediate pieces on, say, it's called Arc Digital, right? Is the medium?
Yeah, I write there sometimes. I'm a full-time freelancer and have been for 10 years. And right now I write most often for tablet, and for occasionally you can find me on the U.S. Spectator. I sometimes write for Airmail, which is Graydon Carter's new newsletter come magazine. But basically, this sort of many irons in the fire approach was valuable in two ways. For one thing, it taught me to organize the hell out of my time when I had spread myself too thin, which I did for years and years. My policy was to just say yes to everything. If I thought that I could do it, and sometimes, if I didn't necessarily think that I could, I would say yes to it because I wanted the work. And, so there would be moments where I was incredibly busy and having to kind of structure my day, because I would write, by this point I was blogging for MTV, which eventually segued into a reporting gig at MTV News. And I would do that in the morning, and then I would take a break. I would have lunch, I would do yoga, and then I would come back in the afternoon and I would work on either novel edits or eventually a new book. So, being able to kind of shift gears was an important lesson to learn, for sure. The other thing was, writing in all of these different genres. I'd wake up in the morning and I would have to come up with creative pitches for the day's news, writing for MTV. And then I would have to write this advice column for Sparklife, and I'd have to be funny and compassionate and talk to teenagers sort of on their level. And then I would take a break, and then I'd have to, dive into this dark, weird, sort of supernatural thriller that I was writing. And I wouldn't say that these things bled over, but you were talking about finding your voice. This was a way to flex a lot of different muscles in the direction of eventually honing a kind of a robust craft, which is such a stupid, geeky writer thing to say that kind of means nothing, but also kind of means everything. Yeah.
I also wonder, as you're talking about that, how much influence coming of age as a writer in a time of social media and of blogs where there's such a clear and immediate bit of feedback as to whether people are reading your stuff and sharing it and all of that. I would imagine has hurt in some ways and helped in others. Has anything felt right or wrong about that to you?
About coming of age as a writer in a time,
if you were Charles Dickens and you're writing, even back then he was writing, serialized stuff, so he was probably getting some feedback, but it wasn't like I hit post and then somebody's going to try to be the first comment on this. It's a different world, right? And it probably has advantages and disadvantages. Have you noticed any of those for you?
Well, let's see. I used to be more obsessed with sort of tracking my page views and traffic and comment counts than I am now. So initially, it was a useful metric to just to have instantaneous, not just feedback in the form of criticism, because there's always somebody who wants to go into the comments and tell you that you're ugly. But in the form of seeing what got people's attention, what gets people talking, what goes viral. That was going viral was a different thing in 2004 than it is now, in so many different ways. But even at the time, you could get a sense of, what your, where your interests and your audience's interests intersected. The other thing, of course, is that social media being what it is, because there is always somebody who wants to go into the comments and tell you that you're ugly. I would say that I learned pretty fast, gratefully pretty fast, to make some choices about where I was going to consider feedback from and where I was going to just write people off as, no, I don't respect this opinion and I don't care what you have to say.
Good. That is an important lesson for all of us, I think.
It's a useful skill. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you're going to read the comments, which I also don't really recommend, but if you're going to, don't take every single one to heart.
We should all probably have like a comment reader for us that just saves. It's like the old adage of like, throw away your hate mail, save your love letters.
Right. Well, a comment reader for us. Well, I guess they could save your love letters for you. On the other hand, I mean, who would want to inflict that terrible, terrible job on somebody that they loved?
Right. It would have to be somebody that you hired and didn't love.
Oh, yeah. I'll just do it myself. It's fine.
Okay. So you mentioned the fact that somebody told you early on, like, it's going to be a long slog and it's going to be thankless most of the time. And one thing that comes to mind if I'm listening to this is, well, what if I haven't gotten started yet? That sounds intimidating. I'm 55 years old. Is there still time for me? Is there a softening piece of advice that you could give to that person about just getting going?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, even now, the thing about writing is that you have to sit down and put the words on the page, and that's true for me. Even though I basically do this for a living, there are days where I sit down and I'm like, oh my God, the slog ahead, this blank page. How do I do this? But just getting your words out and not worrying about whether they're perfect or in their final form, which I think is something we're going to eventually talk about too. Just getting a motor behind what you're doing. The idea that age is some kind of a barrier to being published it's just silly. There are all kinds of examples. I can think right off the top of my head of Delia Owens, who wrote Where the Crawdads Sing, who, published her first book at the age of 70 something. And she's been on the New York Times bestseller list for, a million years. So if you have the drive and you have the talent, then, it really is just about getting the words on the page, and nobody will know that you have the talent if you don't put the words on the page. That's
true. That can be your tagline for this. Nobody can know you have the talent if you don't put the words on the page. Okay, we're going to do a quick segment. This is the first time you're going to be the experiment with this, but I'm going to try to go forward, ask more guests this question. The segment is called Your Process is Your Product. And the reason for this is that I talk a lot about having to figure out how can you love the process of writing. That can be extended, of course, to many different things. It could be extended to carpentry. How do you love the process of carpentry without thinking about I'm going to make an award-winning end table? Because probably those awards are not going to make you happy. What's going to make you happy is figuring out how do you love it every day. So, Kat, how do you convince yourself to sit down and write every day? How do you love the act of actually writing?
Well, I hate to give a disappointing answer, but
it's not disappointing yet. We'll see.
I'm trying to preemptively prepare you. I'm going to be so disappointing. But, do any of us really love writing every day?
Ooh, that's the thing. The answer is no.
Do it. We do it anyway.
But how do you, because that's the thing, right? Is it sucks. Anything that is repetitive, whether it's, you're a yoga teacher, right? So
yes.
You probably don't love teaching yoga every day. You probably don't love the starting of the yoga, but you know that it feels good at the end, or that you achieve some sort of flow state in the middle, and so therefore it's worthwhile. So what is it that cues you into doing yoga? Is it I roll out the mat and therefore I've done that, and so therefore I might as well get going? And then so I think similarly, do you have cues to get you going into the writing that make it so that you can remember, oh, I do like this at the end?
Sure. Okay. So, it's interesting because I actually went and did my first solo, like just me yoga practice in a really, really long time.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple of days ago, outside. Oh, here comes Rasputin. And what I did, because I was feeling very uninspired in my practice, was I wrapped up my mat and I got on a bicycle and I rode to the beach, and I did yoga at the beach, which I'd never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is very much analogous to what it's like, to try to motivate yourself to write when it is something that you have to do all the time. And sometimes you don't want to show up to that chair and to that page. There are lots of ways that I get into it when I'm not feeling like doing my job. There's, boring stuff like moving to another room, or saying like, I'm going to write a paragraph and then I'm going to let myself have a cup of coffee. There's also, it depends on what it is, but giving myself permission to write garbage, to just be like, all right, I'm just like going to bang something out. And maybe it's not even complete sentences. Maybe I'm just kind of like creating a skeletal structure that I'm going to end up throwing away at the end. But it feels good to feel as though you're being organized, to start, making something that's sort of segmenting itself out on the page. Oh gosh, what else? Giving myself permission to write out of order. If I'm working on a book, and this was the case for the book that I just recently completed, there were parts of it that were an absolute slog, and there were parts of it that I couldn't wait to get to. And when I was in the slog and I was like, this sucks, I don't want to do this right now, sometimes I would give myself permission to just be like, all right, put it on hold, go write one of the scenes, just a scene, not getting like so enveloped in it that you just go running off the rails and, to Alaska or whatever. But, to get into it, to kind of get the juices flowing on something that you are excited about, then you can take that energy back and write about the thing, that you're not as excited about, or to only write, the parts of that scene that move you. This isn't my tip, it's a friend's, my friend Julia Strayer, who I'm in a writing group with. But she's amazing at dialogue. And she sometimes will just like block out, this happens, and then she'll just write the dialogue for a scene. And, it starts to kind of build itself out from there. I feel like I'm rambling at this point.
No, we have a whole segment now dedicated to this, Kat. You can ramble. But I think what you're talking about is also akin to if you were building a house, right? Like there would be certain parts of it that would be fun or kind of entertaining. Like raising the studs would feel really good. You'd be like, oh shit, we made a wall. This is the real deal. There are other parts like spackling that aren't particularly fun, right? Like joining the drywall, that's not going to be necessarily all that entertaining. And based on the energy you have in a certain day, you may be able to attack a more tedious job, or you may need the burst of like the energy that comes from raising those walls. So I do think it's worth talking about those strategies of, God, today I don't feel it at all. So I'm going to work on coming up with silly chapter titles that I may never even use, but at least I'm attaching myself to this project in some way. I have a friend who's a screenwriter who writes in a partnership, and they will pick out the scenes that they each want to write, kind of like draft picks. Like, I want that one, and you're going to be better at that one. And it's also kind of, I think, valuable to think of, even though it's maybe just you, think of like drafting the scenes, like you're saying, of I'm really excited about that one, so I'm going to work on that today. And then when you get down to it, you may only have 3 or 4 scenes that you don't want to write, and then you'll store up the energy to get that done.
Yeah. I mean, I also take a lot of breaks when I write. I will, if I'm stuck, I get up and I go for a walk, and I may think about the scene. I may think about it a lot, or I may sort of ruminate on it and then just let it simmer. And sometimes I come back with a solution. Usually I come back with a solution. And it's so easy to get stuck on, depending on what it is, even if it's just like a segue from one idea to the other, or, how am I going to, if you're writing fiction, how am I going to, physically get this person from this situation into this situation? Mm-hmm. I think that giving yourself permission to pause, to move around, to let things percolate. Some of the best advice that I got when I was first starting out, when I had to dive into a major revision on my first book, and I was terrified. I thought, like, I had already made this thing. I was like, I made this thing. It's a complete thing. Mm-hmm. And now you want me to dismantle it. Like, you want me to dismantle it and like take these little things and move them around. It's like, you might as well ask me to like take a cake apart and then rebuild the cake. I was so afraid of diving into it. And instead what I did was I spent a lot of time kind of moping around thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that what I thought was just me like being a big baby and procrastinating was the most valuable preparation that I'd ever done. Eventually my editor got back to me and was like, you be working? And I was like, well, I'm doing a lot of thinking, and I think maybe I'll be ready to try this like in a week. And she's like, that's perfect. That's exactly mm-hmm. what it takes. You have to think for a long time before you get into it. So
mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's valuable to remind yourself in the same way that if someone were going to start or go to yoga for the day, knowing that that's going to take energy, right? Like prepping yourself in a way to go to yoga, to go through the mental exercise of like getting into, again, sort of that flow state and then coming down from it. And similarly, that it is going to it's going to cost something from you each day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into some questions. Thank you, Kat, for being the first participant in Your Process is Your Product. Jenna wonders this. Is it good to write the way you speak? I sometimes get told that readers can hear my voice when they've read what I've written, but maybe that's not the best way to write? ?
That's a really interesting question that I've never thought about. Is it good to write the way you speak? I don't think it's bad to write the way you speak. I suppose it depends somewhat on how you speak. But I also think, not to, be that annoying person, but that when somebody says they can hear your voice in your work, doesn't necessarily mean that they hear you talking. It's more that they hear your personality, especially someone who knows you very well, may be able to kind of sense your or your you-ness, the not even just that you're literally writing as you would speak, extemporaneously, but little things like turns of phrase, or the way that you connect one idea to another. Mm-hmm. Somebody who knows you will recognize that in your work, and that's definitely not a bad thing. It means, I think, actually, that you are writing something that's authentic. Mm-hmm. Writing something close to yourself. You're not trying to imitate somebody else, like, say, I once tried to imitate John Irving to mm-hmm. my great embarrassment and dismay.
Yeah, it's also, I think, worth thinking about, does a person hear your voice in your nonfiction, which is obviously good? In fiction, it becomes tricky sometimes because we want to hear the characters' voices more than necessarily the writers, unless, like, John Irving does have, for example, there's something to the way he writes where he's able to like take you on a jag of 10 pages of somebody's past and then bring you back that feels akin to having a different voice. But I think for most things, we want the characters to do the talking, the having a personality. And anyway, that's all that came to mind when I thought of that. Mm-hmm. Mike wonders, Do you find it easy or difficult to hop in and out of your fictional characters' voices in between essays and journalism pieces? If it's the latter, if you do find it difficult, what is your process to overcome that?
So I do sometimes read my character's dialogue aloud, like it's a movie script, basically, inflection and everything, and try to sort of imagine it like a scene. And if I have any concerns that they don't sound like themselves, that has always resolved it.
Just the tip is then just read it out loud, and then you won't have to worry about whether that voice is coming along.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to read it out loud if you can visualize it. I mean, for me, I require or maybe I'm just dramatic, I don't know, the reading out loud. But that's been useful for me. And if it's useful for you, that would be wonderful.
I once read out loud a book that I was finishing. I thought it never actually saw the light of day, and recorded myself reading it out loud, and then listened to myself reading it out loud. And that
how did that go?
Torture. That is just pure torture. That is
one step, do that to yourself?
One step too far. Because you can tell in the reading it out loud whether it's right or wrong there. You don't need to record it and then listen to it. That's just like one of the circles of hell, I think.
No, I mean, that's like the world's most painful and unnecessary way to find out that you couldn't be a voiceover actor.
Right. Yeah.
I already know that I couldn't be. I don't need to find that out that way.
Speaking of voiceover stuff, you host a podcast. Scott, I hope you will post a link to said podcast as well. Where did that come from? Where did that pop up?
That was something I never envisioned myself doing. And then it turned out that hosting a podcast, I mean, just podcasting in general is great, especially if you have a wonderful person to do it with, which I do. My co-host on Feminine Chaos is the name of the podcast. And my co-host is Phoebe Maltz-Bode, who wrote a book called The Perils of Privilege. And she's much smarter and better at everything than I am. But, she and I had been friendly on Twitter for a while and would often get into these conversations online. And somebody eventually suggested that we should podcast together. And we did a trial run, and it was a lot of fun. And also, especially at this particular moment, because it can be kind of fraught to have conversations in public in a forum like Twitter. On a podcast, if somebody wants to cancel you for something that you've said, they have to listen for like an hour. They have to be really dedicated to go in and dig that up and then get mad at it. Mm-hmm. So it feels like a safer place to have a complicated, nuanced conversation. And, obviously just talking to somebody, being able to hear their voice, I think that I feel like we're rediscovering, not just us, but everybody who's doing podcasting is rediscovering something that maybe got a little lost as we all got, so into our screens and sort of lost the inflection that comes from listening to voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I noticed that it sort of goes without saying that on Twitter, people can be maybe a worse version of themselves very easily. I think it's interesting when you know people that you follow on Twitter, and then you look at a tweet without any context of knowing them, right? So like thinking, I know this person, this is a friend of mine, I know that he's being a little harsh in this joke. If you remove that, then you're like, oh shit, I could see why that would piss people off, because mm-hmm. it just comes at you from with just no context, or like you said, any nuance.
Right.
Dragana Georgievich wonders this: third person versus first person, which do you prefer? It's been said first should be used only sparingly, only if you have a super distinctive voice. Besides, it may sound too auto-fiction-y these days, but I kind of enjoy reading it. Do you have any advice?
Oh, I am such a fan of using both in the same book. I did it in my first book, and I guess I guess it's not giving away too much to say that I use that same multiple perspectives in the next book that I have coming out. And I don't think there are any hard and fast rules about it. Obviously, first person, if you have a character that has a very distinctive voice, also, if you have an unreliable narrator, obviously, you want to use first person. There are so many reasons to use first person. I wouldn't get bogged down in that.
I wonder what you think about this. I tend to think that you can keep up. One of the advantages of first person is that it seems very immediate. It can draw you in really quickly. One of the disadvantages is that it's hard to keep someone interested for a long book that's first person, because you kind of get tired of that one person. Does that make sense when you rattle around in your brain, Kat?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I just I feel like I need to grab it off my shelf just to check. But I just read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which is quite lengthy, and I think it is in first person. So maybe I just uncovered the exception to the rule. But I don't know. I think if the story is gripping, and especially if the very first thing, obviously, yes, if you're writing in the first person, then the person telling the story needs to be compelling,
Mm-hmm.
in some way, whether it's how they tell the story or whether it's that there's like record scratch, freeze frame, they're in some kind of crazy situation and you really, really want to know how this all began.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be a reason for sure to keep reading. But
Mm-hmm.
apart from that, yeah, I don't know. I think that I think kind of anything goes.
Zoheb wonders this. Do you have any tips for developing an antagonist, which you can go in any direction that you want with that?
Oh, okay. Let's see. An antagonist. This is so funny because I do tend to write characters who are sort of their own worst enemies. But I think the antagonist there needs to be echoes of your protagonist, of your hero in that
Mm-hmm.
character, in order for them to sort of effectively stand in the way of that person getting what they want, which is, what makes them the antagonist. It can't just be that they're the living embodiment of all evil. There has to be something about them that's not necessarily like a mirror image or a funhouse mirror image, but something that relates them to the protagonist, so that you feel, the sense of tension there.
Mm-hmm. So like I'm going to get over my head on philosophy here, but like the idea of your shadow self, right?
Right.
Like the worst parts about you can be the most, or the things that you fear the most being like what makes up your shadow self, which is like Kant or something that I'm going to say wrong. And I'm not going to go far down that road is what I'm telling you.
It's funny. I just remembered reading somewhere that your nemesis, in real life, is a person whose sort of main personality traits are all of the things that you hate about yourself.
Right. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Kat, thank you so much for doing this. What's the best way for people to stay in touch with you? Is it through Twitter? Is that your most visible place?
I hate to say it, but yeah, that's the social media that I'm the most active on is Twitter. It's sort of required if you're a culture writer. Unfortunately, you have to be on the worst site on the internet. But also, I like email a lot, and I'm quite responsive on email, at least for now, because I don't get that many of them. So if you want to reach out to me at catrosenfield.com, I am always happy to hear from people. And yeah, I'm Kat Rosenfield, just my name, at Twitter and on Instagram, where I usually post pictures of my dog.
And yoga, if I remember correctly.
Occasionally.
There's might be some yoga on there. So you'll get both, guys. Lots of healthy behaviors in the Kat Rosenfield world. Kat, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
I'm glad. Bye-bye.